Hi, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. This is your weekly check-in for motivation, education, and inspiration on your path towards success with myopia management. And in today's episode, I have a very special guest. This is somebody that a lot of the audience, a lot of people in my life in the optometry world have said, you got to get Dr. Steve Vargo on. He speaks directly to everything that applies to talking to patients about myopia management. And as it turns out, he is the keynote speaker for Vision by Design 2025. He's a consultant, he's a speaker, he's an Amazon bestseller. Steve Vargo, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Matthew, thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, and you, like I said, you're the perfect person for people who are interested in myopia management, or docs who have been doing it for a long time and are looking to step up their game. And this is going to kick off my series of the Road to Vision by Design 2025, where we're going to be highlighting some of the more interesting and noteworthy speakers at the event to help build momentum and get you introduced to the what is the Super Bowl of myopia management. Steve, so for a little housekeeping before we start, if anybody wants to get in touch with you on the internet, how should they do so?
Well, I'm on the socials, but I also have a personal website at drstevevargo.com. I do work with the company called iDoc, that's idoc.net, but you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram just as easily.
Excellent. And for Vision by Design info, you go to aaomc.org. The event's going to be taking place in October from the 22nd through the 25th. You can find more content like this at myopiamindset.com. And if you are interested in myopia management, if you love this stuff just as much as we do, if you want to spread the word about how awesome this specialty is, consider becoming a paid supporter where you can get extended versions of our episodes, a bonus episode every month, and all of our content is early for our supporters. All right. So Steve, I want to talk about your session at VBD, but before we get there, I want to talk about your origin story, because I think that's just as important as everything that you're going to say on stage, because I think it speaks a lot to your mindset and how you got to this point. So let's start. You graduated in the late 90s from ICO. You were an optometrist. You had an interest in the business of optometry. And for whatever reason, optometry just wasn't doing it for you. And you decided to go to back to school for your MBA after about 6 years of practice. So that's where I wanted to start. What was the motivation or reasoning behind that transitional process in your life?
Yeah, it's so years ago. Let me go back to optometry school and even my decision to get into optometry school. I was that weird doctor that always liked the business side. I always was drawn toward that entrepreneurial side of healthcare, which is why I chose optometry. There was that opportunity to blend healthcare, which I was also interested in, with the ability to operate a business, run the business side of things. And I did it for about 15 years and I liked it. I enjoyed it. I got a lot of satisfaction out of it. I hit a point where I realized I liked the business side more than the clinical side. And some opportunities came around in my life that created this crossroads moment where I had the opportunity to go into consulting full time. What led me to some of the content, books I've written and things like that was I started to see things from the other side. And I started to see the struggles that doctors were going through. A lot of them were the same struggles I went through, but I started to see them from a different vantage point. And when I heard the phrase before, it's hard to read the label when you're inside the box. Well, that's what it's like practicing eye care. I'm no smarter than anybody else, but I have the advantage of having worked with hundreds of doctors across the country. You start to see these trends and you start to see these commonalities. And I started to recognize certain things that were preventing doctors from being successful. So I'll stop there because I think maybe that leads into some of the things we're going to talk about. Certainly one of those being, as we move into specialty care, myopia management, things like that, it's what prevents the patient from agreeing to the care. It doesn't matter how good the service is or the product if you can't get patients to say yes to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And these are things that I have taken for granted. I'm not an optometrist, but I grew up in a pioneer orthokeratology practice. My dad was the optometrist. My mom was the office manager who brought it all together. And I kind of took this for granted because I watched them do a lot of the things that you would cite as positives and things to aspire to. I saw them doing that already, and I just assumed all optometrists were doing this ignorantly so. And so like, what were these things that you were seeing back then that led you to this point then? Like, what were these common aspects?
Yeah, it's an interesting take that you just gave as well, because I think a lot of doctors are probably, this isn't unique to doctors, but people that are successful, they do take it for granted. And
Yeah.
even on the topic of, let's just say, patient communication, the patient experience, those sorts of things, some of them don't even know what they're doing right.
Mm-hmm.
They're just doing it right. They kind of take that for granted. But, I was always told right when I came into consulting by a mentor of mine, something that seems really obvious, and we've heard it over and over, that the customer experience is everything. Customer service, the customer experience. That was really drilled into me. But he said, every doctor knows that. Most don't do it very well, though.
Right.
And it was true. So I started to really look at what are the doctors who are successful doing differently. Patient communication became a real focus of mine because I started to see how certain doctors interact differently with patients. And you start to see, maybe even more importantly, the things that we do as communicators that actually prevent people from moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is what your whole keynote is essentially going to be about, if I'm not mistaken. The title of your session is Staying Ahead of Hesitation, Overcome Objections, Gain Trust, and Drive Treatment Acceptance. So like, let's talk about it. Like what is what is the fulcrum of the lecture? Like what is the whole point of the lecture? And how did you come to this decision for this to be like something that you could address specifically, if I'm making any sense here? Like,
You are.
because you are speaking my language here. Because like I have been in a lot of practices over the years where docs just don't know how to, I would call it, sell to the patients, and they feel like they're sleazy car salesmen. They feel like it's not their job to do it. They feel like they're trying to influence the decision-making process of the patient. And meanwhile, they are not establishing the necessary trust and relationship that I watched my parents do in the practice I grew up in, where their patients like absolutely loved them, and had that trust with them. So it's like, is that where it all starts, with trust, essentially?
Ultimately, it builds up to trust. I mean, that is the cornerstone of what we do, and really overcoming the hesitation, the skepticism. I had a doctor once tell me, and this is where this particular keynote presentation started from. The doctor said, a lot of my patients are skeptical of anything new. And that really resonated with me, because I thought, in the world of consulting, we're talking about new all the time. You need to constantly be innovating and investing in new technology, new products, new services. But what difference does any of that make if patients don't go along with it? So, Matt, to answer your question, a lot of it has to do with, and I think a lot of people realize this, but again, are we engaging with it in a way that connects with people? A lot of it is just psychology and consumer behavior, and really understanding that. And I know a lot of doctors who are seeing patients don't really have the time to do the research on that, but I did. That's part of my job. I wanted to understand that better, and I went pretty deep. I wrote a few books, and to write books, you gotta go deep on the research to find out what the psychology behind it and behind the decisions that we make. A lot of the things I researched were in the world of sales. And I know that word is kind of off-putting for doctors. Understandably, I get it. But at the same time, good salespeople are engaging with people in a way that they don't feel, to use your term, like sleazy car salesmen. Car salesmen always get picked on the worst. My last couple experiences with cars were really great. I almost feel at some point maybe we'll switch that. But I mean, the analogy still it is relevant. And I think, Matt, a lot of it has to do with switching the focus from the product to the other person, in our case, the patient.
Right.
If we can just do that, then it stops feeling like we're being that sleazy car salesman. But one thing we have to do is get better at asking questions and understanding the other person. That's the psychology. Then one of the number one thing patients want from their doctor is to feel heard and understood. It's not getting everything new pushed on us, all the new technology and everything that new that came out. We want to be understood as patients. We want to be heard. And once we feel that the doctor hears us, understands us, we start to let down our guard. We start to be more trustful of what they have to offer, because now we're looking for a solution. We've had a chance to voice our concerns. We're looking for a solution, and we start to lean in. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're bought in, we're handing over our credit card quite yet, but you've got to at least make people curious. You got them to get them to lean in. And really, and I go into this more in the presentation, but I'm a huge advocate for asking more questions, and not just more questions, but better quality questions as well.
Yeah. And what are the kinds of questions that ODs have been asking? Like, in my opinion, the way this conversation usually goes is as soon as there's any kind of resistance, that optometrist usually just gets cold feet and pulls back. And it's like, okay, well, this is what I told you, and here it is. And they can't wait to get out of that conversation. So what kind of questions have optometrists been asking before that just don't work? Like, because you had said at the beginning of this conversation that a lot of the times the optometrist doesn't even know what's working or what's not working. So let's talk about what's not working. What are optometrists doing that's not working specifically?
I think a lot of our questions tend to focus on things that don't necessarily change behaviors. It doesn't motivate them to want to take some kind of action. We're asking questions like, when was your last eye exam? How old are your glasses? How are you seeing with your glasses? And that sort of thing. And then maybe we pick up something on our clinical findings. We jump right in from some very basic questions that don't really inspire action, that don't really pique anyone's curiosity. And then we go into the clinical exam, and then we find something like progressive myopia. Let's just use that as the example. And then, ding, ding, ding. Okay, I need to plant the seed now for myopia management. But I don't really understand yet how the myopia is even affecting the parents or that child. So just even simple questions like, how is this affecting you? Anything that gets them to open up and share their story, we can now start to connect with. So now I'm not just treating the myopia. The more information I get from you, I can start to actually treat the whole person, because the situation, and with the parents as well, we don't know really what's going on in their head until we ask, until we explore. Does this concern you? How much does this concern you? Sometimes it's just as simple as saying, tell me more about that, and then giving them the silence and the space to share more information. And the more you can find out about them, the more you can get them to open up. They start to tell you what they want. This is why we feel like sleazy car salespeople, is because we end up trying to push products on people that maybe they're not ready to hear or ready to accept, versus getting them to tell us what's important to them and what they want. And now we become the guide helping them solve the issue.
Right. I love everything that you just said. And one of the key points I want to focus on specifically is, patients understand a lot more than I think we give them credit for. Like, they understand that too much screen time is bad. They understand that their kids are not getting outside or eating or exercising the way that they should be. Parents, often the mother who's in that situation, is often mom in my experience. She knows that things are not exactly right, that things could be improved on. And part of what you just said, what I loved about what you said, is like, you are engaging that mom in telling her about what's happening. You're helping her feel understood. There's this feature of active listening that I think a lot more people in society could benefit from, which is like, you can have even a disagreement with people. You may not even agree on what you're talking about, but as long as both people feel understood, that moves that marker ahead so much more to helping that person feel respected. And I think with myopia, that's the case. Moms know that things need to change. She's just putting up some barriers to you because she wants to make sure you are the best eye care provider for that child. Does that kind of key in with the subject of this talk and your viewpoint on this?
Yeah, absolutely. maybe it goes back to the psychology part, but when we really look at the research as to what is the most important factor in most of our decisions, what drives our decisions, it has much more to do with feelings and emotions than it does logic. In fact, the research, and you may have heard this before, that 95% of our decisions are based on emotions, not logic. So back to the point of asking questions, we really want to ask questions that get people to elicit their emotions about something. How do you really feel about that? When we get back to the topic at hand, staying ahead of hesitation, those hesitations a lot of times are a feeling, and it might be a negative feeling. Let me give you an example, Matthew. I'm sitting here and I'm lecturing you, who's got a child sitting in the chair, about progressive myopia and the risk of a retinal detachment. And your dad sitting in the corner, your biggest concern is it safe? I've never heard of myopia management before. I'm afraid to put something in my kid's eye that I don't know is safe. The thing is, a lot of our objections remain silent. Maybe I don't trust you yet to share that, but these are the sorts of things that cause us to go, I'll think about it. Let me get back to you. Maybe next year. I got to talk to my spouse. These are just excuses. They're procrastinations. We're not telling you what we're really feeling. So again, it's a process of asking questions and giving people space to tell them, or to tell you, what it is that's really holding you back. What is that feeling? And if they could share that with you, then you guys could discuss that.
Yeah, it's kind of like the low-hanging fruit of objections. You just have to find your way past it. When I would talk with a parent in the practice I grew up in, we expected to hear no, that we just expected it, because back then, I mean, these were the early days of Ortho-K. We would put people on a 5-year average expectation. We weren't going to see a conversion for 5 years. So we're looking at 5 years of pushback on all the things that you just said. And optometrists today do not have that 5-year plan to deal with, but they have so much more to deal with. I feel like they have like more knowledgeable parents. They have the access to the internet. They have all this other stuff competing for the parents' attention, all these other important things that need to happen. And I just feel like optometrists are not really equipped coming out of school, because they are focused on the disease state of optometry, or different aspects of patient care, but nobody's being taught how to sell. You know what I mean? Like, do you agree with that? And how do we take the sting out of selling? Because it's a necessary thing that has to happen.
Yeah, it's really pretty easy when you reframe the objective. So this is a problem in sales in general. It's certainly not unique to optometry, but the feeling is that I need to educate you on something with the expectation that you're going to say yes, based on the information I gave you. There's a step in between. If you could get people there, it's sort of this stepping stone between education and commitment. It's curiosity. Really, all I'm trying to build in the room, as I'm asking questions, as I'm getting you to elicit the things that you're having trouble with, and I'm beginning to educate you about some of the things, is just make you curious about the solution that's out there. Matthew, when's the last time you bought anything of any significant value without asking some questions? Never. We don't. We ask, we're curious, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of the best ways to know if your process is working is the patient asking you questions. So I always tell people, don't feel defeated because you educated them on something like myopia management or IPL, dry eye. You know, we can pick at multiple pairs of glasses and they said no. The goal's not really to get them to whip out their credit card yet. Ultimately, yes, we want to impact outcomes, but what I try to teach is let's communicate in a way that just gets them, at least initially, to lean in, to be curious, to want more information. I can't make you buy something until you want to hear more about it. From there, that starts to stimulate some changes in your head, in your own head, that causes you to go, maybe I do need this.
Right.
Now you're asking me questions, but we've got to get people on that path, because ultimately, selling is so much easier when you get the other person to sell themselves. You know, we generally do not buy things because somebody else told us to. We buy things because we've convinced ourselves it's a good idea. And if people could just do that, I think it would take a lot of the pressure off selling, whether you're a doctor, whether you're an optician. Let's just communicate in a way that gets them curious and wanting more information. Then it doesn't feel difficult. Not everybody's going to say yes, but I promise you, because I've seen the results, a lot more people will.
Right. And seeing the results, you've been doing this for a long time now. Like when you consult or when you help out a practice or speak on stage, what are the like the initial questions or like what are the first steps of that process? Because I see optometrists who are even just afraid to have the conversation and get the patient to get those questions start moving. So what is like an important first step for anybody who really wants to change this dynamic in their practice, in your opinion?
You mean as far as the questions the doctor would ask the patient?
Yeah, like that. I've seen so many times. Like I have done consulting in the past with the consulting on J&J's Ability Overnight Ortho K lens, and I would go and sit in a practice for a day and just watch. You know how I would sit with the techs, I would sit with an optometrist, I would sit with the receptionist, and just try to see how things are moving and compare it to what I understood and grew up with. And I would see in certain practices, the techs themselves would ask better questions than the optometrist who wouldn't follow up on it. And I would say, you know, Ortho K is not going to work for you if you cannot have these kinds of conversations. And they're like, I don't even know where to get started. And there's a lot of hand holding in that aspect. So, like, what is your advice for getting those first questions or making that first step a reality for an optometrist?
Well, I think it just goes back to open-ended questions where you're steering really free of any product placement at all in your questions and just understanding. Usually when people come in, there's some process where they tell you or they write something down, you know, what they're there for. Your tech asks. So you kind of know what they're there for. And it's just exploring beyond that, asking questions about how something's affecting them, how much it concerns them, what kind of problem is that creating in your life? Is it creating any problems for you at work? Tell me more about that. How is that creating an issue? Is that something that has you concerned? One of the questions that I propose in the lecture is, it's real simple. How is this affecting you? And I've had so many doctors come back and say, you know, I heard you talk and I started asking that question, and it's just amazing the reply from the patients. It's like they just kind of pause for a second and look at me like, oh, no one's ever asked me that before. And they'll start opening up about things that they would never have shared through the standard Q&A. Once the better you understand that, then we can start moving into product, whatever it may be, because now we get the patient to the point where they're curious and they want to know more. Matthew, if there's one thing I could change, and maybe the younger doctors listening to this, it's the way we were taught in school that we take out into the real world. And I think we're sort of set up for failure from the beginning. The way we were taught in school, no offense to the schools, and hopefully they're doing a little bit better job at this, but we were taught go in, ask a few questions, and then spend the rest of the time educating them, telling them what they want, what they need, talking at them, right? And then you'd go back when you were in school to present to the doctor. Did you tell them about this? Did you tell them about that? Did you tell them about these side effects? Did you go over these options? No, go back in and you tell them about all this stuff. Not once did the doctors ever send us back in and saying, did you ask them this? Did you ask them that? It was always about education. And so I think we take that in the real world. We spend a little bit of time, we ask a few questions, get a little bit of information, and then we spend a long time educating them about things they may or may not even need or want. Flip that around. Just flip that around. Spend more time listening, more time asking questions and getting them to talk, getting them to tell you what their concerns are, what they're worried about, what you need. And you could look at me and say, well, this is just one guy's opinion. Well, would you believe 68,000 people? Because that's what one study found, that in 68,000 people in sales, they wanted to find out what are the top qualities of the top salespeople. The number one quality of 68,000 people, they were the ones doing the least amount of talking.
Right.
We just need to flip that around. We need to go in with a sense of curiosity about our patient, wanting to learn more, get them to talk, get them to open up. And you know what? Maybe there's nothing there. Maybe they really are just there because they can't see well out of their glasses. They need a new pair, and we'll write them up a new one. They just want to use their insurance. But you're going to learn a lot about your patients if you just pause a little bit longer and give them the space to talk.
Yeah. And I would say that the, most successful orthokeratologists in the world agree with you. They have cultivated their practice on everything you just said, spending more time with the patient, asking those kinds of questions, establishing trust. They may already even know what kind of lens they want to fit your child with. The whole time they're establishing trust. I am the best eye care provider for your child. I will handle their myopia. You can trust me to deliver high quality care for your child. It makes me wonder about this idea that, like, you know, optometrists have kind of been marginalized in society. Like, every one of them is made out to be the same. It's your eye exam, your glasses and contacts, patient grabs their script, goes online, whatever the case may be. Patients don't understand that a different kind of optometrist is out there. And it's to the doctor's benefit, in my opinion, to be this exceptionally different person, because we want that reaction from mom and dad to be like, oh, you're a different optometrist. You care about me and my kid. Would you agree with that? And how big of a role does that play? Like, you can ask all of the important questions, but is there a definite benefit to being that person who cares about the well-being of the parent and patient by getting invested in their life? Is that part of the questions that should be asked?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, that's what it's all about. And you're right. I mean, you make a great point on anything in terms of creating that. Maybe it's just a source of differentiation where the way you communicate with people leaves patients going, oh, wow, I'd been to eye exams before. It was just almost very robotic. We went through some tests. They asked a few questions, which is better, one or two, and I went and got my glasses. But I really connected with this doctor. We really had a conversation. He or she really seemed concerned about what I was going through. I think sometimes we make the mistake as eye doctors, assuming that patients are just there for a very technical reason. They ran out of contacts and they need new contacts, or their insurance is paying for another pair of glasses. But, behind that patient, behind that 10-20 appointment is a real human being. Are we really exploring what's going on, what aspects of their vision, and really not just vision? We go beyond that, but what is bothering them? If we can elicit that, I think we'll leave patients feeling the way you just described. Wow, this was a different experience than I've had at eye exams in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. We mentioned taking the time. I'm worried about the state of the modern optometry practice, because I have seen, practices where, they are seeing patients every 10 to 15 minutes. They are back to back booked. And one of the biggest points of resistance I've got about consulting about myopia management or ortho-K is I just don't have the time to do this. I don't have the time to ask these questions. What would you say to that? Because it's an unfortunate reality of the modern state of optometrists that they just don't have the time to do this level of, work, essentially, to change their mindset and how they are interacting with the parents. So what would you say to that with the doctors like, look, Steve, this all sounds great. I just don't have the time to do this.
I love that question. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I actually address it in the talk. I really don't want you to take more time. It's not my goal. I know doctors are busy. I mean, if you work at a practice where I don't want to define the time frame that's too short or too long. I've seen it work in both scenarios with really good staff in place and efficiencies. Some high volume practices do just fine, and others like to spend longer time with patients. But so we've focused really on asking more questions and higher quality questions. But here's the other side of that, Matthew, is that when you do that, when you really understand the patient and their concerns, their needs, you don't have to spend as much time trying to convince them to do something. Mm-hmm. Where do we spend our most time? Educating, talking to people, trying to get them to do things, to buy into something, to take some kind of action. And we'd spend a lot of time trying to convince them. Well, what if I got you to convince yourself before I even talked about a product, right? Let's just say take multiple pairs of glasses if you're an optician and you really understand what the patient wants, needs, what hasn't worked in the past. right? Now I can just go, I think I have a really good solution that's going to solve your problem. And I can focus on that. I don't have to go through 12 different options. So I'm not trying to add time to an already busy schedule. I'm just saying switch the order. Instead of going into the room asking a few questions and then spending a long time educating, which is really where we've hung our hat as doctors, right? We educate, educate, educate. I'm just saying spend more time in a state of curiosity about your patient. Learn about them, ask about them, get them to tell you what's important to them. And then the solution part on the back end gets much easier because now you can focus on what they actually need and it will connect with them.
Right. Yeah. And I think that it's just absolutely, I love it. Absolutely perfect advice. Like you need to get this down. You need to, I would even venture practice it in front of the mirror, practice it in front of your staff, figure out the kind of questions that you want to be asking and learn how to adjust from there. But Steve, here's the second point of pushback. What do we do about the dreaded no? In myopia, specifically with Ortho K, cost is brought up as the number one point of pushback. And optometrists oftentimes hear no, and then they just immediately shut it down. Whereas, like I said, I took this for granted. I heard no all the time growing up in my parents' practice. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to hear this at least 4 more times over the next 4 years. And then on that 5th year, this is going to come together because that's what was happening. So how do we address the dreaded no, for an optometrist when they get that point of resistance?
Yeah. Well, you're never going to convert everybody. So again, the title of the presentation that we're talking about is staying ahead of hesitation. So I know there's going to be people that say no. I'm under no delusion that you're going to have 100% conversion rate. But what I'm trying to do is build the value through my questions and earlier on, so there's less people who say no at the end. So I've been a fan of something called the feel, felt, found approach.
Okay.
Which again, it doesn't guarantee that somebody's going to change their mind. But when you get to the end, right, you've asked the questions, you've got them to tell you what's important to them, and you've presented a solution, and then they still say no. One good thing is, Matthew, they told us what the concern is. A lot of times a silent objection we can't deal with. Right. I want them to tell me. That's another part of this talk, is getting people just to at least tell you what the objection is. Price, great. At least we know. I don't have to guess. I don't have to go down all these different paths hoping I hit on the right thing. So feel, felt, found is just, it's empathizing with them, is agreeing. Not agreeing that's too expensive, but just saying, I understand how you feel.
Yeah.
Don't be the doctor who says, don't you care about your eyesight? Right. That's a great way to not only not make a sale, but have them never come back to you again and probably tell their friends not to come back. So defensiveness usually doesn't work well. But just say, no, I get it. I understand how you feel. Share stories of other patients. Say a lot of patients felt the same way. Yeah. But what they found when they did invest in this option is that it worked a lot better for them, and they were glad that they decided to move forward with that.
Right.
Then you're just giving them a space to reconsider. If you've done a good job in the exam, there's still a chance that they're going to think about that when they leave. And that's what I want. That alone can be a win. If they leave there with a hard no, it's not really a win. But at least if I pique their interest and they said, I just can't do it right now, hey, at least you know that that's an option that's out there. Maybe we can talk about that at your next visit. Or if you decide you want to give it a try, just give us a call.
Right. Yeah. And, that's solid gold right there. I have seen this in practice, and I've seen this happen right in front of me where, the parent is saying, the price seems expensive. I don't know if we can pay this amount. It seems high. And I love everything you said. Like, what I've seen is then taking that and being like, I understand what you're saying. That makes sense to me. And some of our other parents who have had their kids enrolled in the program have also expressed concern about the amount of the treatment. But what they've also said is that after they had the kid in treatment, they can't imagine life without, Johnny being in these Ortho K lenses. And, like, I've seen this happen. So I'm very excited that you mentioned that particular part of it. There's a part in the description for your talk that says, it's a deep and often humorous look at the real reasons patients hesitate. What is the humorous part of it? If you don't, I want people to go to the lecture. It's going to be awesome. I'll be there. I'll be sitting at VBD at this lecture. But what is the humorous part? If you could give us a little, insight to that.
Well, again, there's some stories that I'll share, so I'll go more into detail in the presentation. But it goes back to just the lack of connection between what the doctor thinks is the issue and what's really going on in the mind of the patient when we look at the things that most commonly cause people to object to something. So I know that's not a humorous description of it, but maybe that something you just have to wait for in the in the actual presentation.
Gotcha. All right. Steve, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I'm going to be at Vision by Design. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person. And I would tell, anybody who saw this interview, you go to Vision by Design, introduce yourself to Steve, say, I heard your interview on the Myopia Mindset. Absolutely loved your keynote, because it's going to be a fantastic addition to Vision by Design. So Steve, thank you so much for coming on the program. And like I said at the beginning of the episode, if anybody wants to get in touch with you or find out more information, remind us how they can do so.
Yeah, you can go to my website at drstevevargo.com. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch, or just look me up I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram a fair amount.
Awesome. Yeah. And, this is that point where I start selling. If like and subscribe, if wherever you found this episode, give us a 5-star review if you can. Those really help us reach more people out in the world. We think myopia management is the best thing in the world here at this podcast. So help us spread that word. You can do so by becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. You get an extended version of every episode we do. So that's more insight, more time with our amazing guests. You get a bonus episode each and every month. And I say, it's $12 a month, which if you think about it is basically the price of a cup of coffee each and every week. So I say, hey, if you would buy me a cup of coffee to have on guests like Steve and talk about specialty eye care, nerd out about myopia, please consider becoming a supporter of the Myopia Mindset at myopiamindset.com. And that's going to do it for this episode. Steve, thanks again. And for everybody else, we'll see you at the next one.